Welcome to Wellness with John, resources to help you thrive. I'm John Peters. And in this video, I want to give you an instruction for one of the easiest things on the planet to do to lower your anxiety. It's just amazingly, magically effective for how little work you have to do and the benefit that you're likely to get. So stay tuned and I'll explain. Okay, so in this video, I want to talk about something that you can do that is almost zero work that I have seen lower the anxiety level of a lot of people. And it's so easy and produces such a good effect that it's kind of like magic. But first off, let me just say that this is a technique that you're going to do a few times a day. So it takes a non-zero amount of work, but it's pretty much near zero, and it's likely to lower your anxiety. But it doesn't tend to work if you are having a crisis that is causing you to be pegged up at the top of your stress scale. Okay. So if you're going through an acute crisis where you're basically turned up to 11 all day, every day, this is not the technique for you. This technique works for people who have significant episodes of anxiety where at times they feel very anxious, but there are times where they are less anxious, right? So whether or not you've been plotting out your daily ups and downs of your anxiety level, which is actually related to what I'm going to teach you, you probably haven't. But if we were to look at you over, let's say, the last 24 hours, we would see that your anxiety level is going up and down. Okay. So if that's true for you, you are a candidate to experiment with this technique. All right. So what the technique does is it provides a really simple, easy to do exercise that starts to build in an enhanced feedback loop for your brain. And all we do is we plug in the feedback loop, and then your brain starts to take care of lowering your anxiety because you are not incompetent. If your anxiety is going up and down, one of the things I assume about you is that you have multiple inner capacities. You have multiple facets of your inner ability to cope effectively with what's going on in your life that have sometimes a good effect, sometimes less of an effect, right? This is why your anxiety is going up and down. You have stress levels that are coming in of various degrees at different moments, but you also have inner capacities that are responding to your stress and you're coping with them to different degrees. And this is why functionally a person's anxiety level is going up and down all of the time, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to give your brain an enhanced ability to steer through that dynamic type of ongoing experience of stress going up and down and inner coping fluctuating as well. Okay. And one way to understand how this works is if you understand a person driving a stick shift car. Okay. So when a person drives a stick shift car, most sticks have a tachometer on the dash. However, most people who actually drive a manual transmission don't visually look at the tachometer. You can. Most people who drive a manual actually use their hearing in order to hear the relative RPMs of the engine in order to use the engagement of the clutch in the right way in order to drive efficiently, right? But imagine a person who knows how to drive a manual transmission, but we put them in a car and we put a piece of paper over the tachometer so they visually can't see it. And then we put earplugs in their ears so they can't hear anything. They're 100% deaf, okay? That person is going to have a much harder time driving. Now, maybe by feel, if they're an experienced driver of a manual transmission, you can, through feel, actually still manipulate the car. So can they get it in gear? Can they get movement? Can they drive down the road? Yes. Okay. Is it going to be harder for them to do that efficiently and safely? Yes. Okay. So their driving in terms of the acuity, the accuracy of manipulating the controls is going to be worse if we reduce the essential types of information that their brain needs in order to manipulate the controls. All right. So I discovered the effect of this stress management technique through the course of my way that I developed that I work with people around trying to reduce issues of anxiety. Okay. And the reason I discovered it and the reason I'm sharing it with you is that one of the things that I often will teach people when I first start working with them to help them lower their anxiety is to calibrate a subjective personal scale of their relative stress level, right? So there are a couple common ways that we ask people to do this. One is just rate your scale in terms of code green, code yellow, code orange, and code red. So we break the scale into 4 areas and we say, where are you in those 4 zones of your stress scale? And in a lot of situations, that's a handy way to talk about your relative activation of your fight or flight response. But the other way is rate your stress on a scale of 1 to 10, okay? With 1 being the most calm that you ever are, and 10 being the most anxious that you ever are, okay? So that's the way to calibrate the 1 to 10 scale, all right? And we can some people get into greater specificity about like what does a 2 mean versus a 4, but we don't necessarily even have to get that precise for this technique to work. Okay. And you can do that. If you Google 1 to 10 stress scale, you'll see how people have kind of defined, well, so a 1, 2, and 3 means very little stress, no, subjective disease. And once you're at a 4, you've got some uneasiness and things like that. You really don't have to get that specific for this technique to work, but you can if you want. So I discovered that this works this way and can function actually as a standalone technique when at some point in my career, part of my standard kind of protocol for working with people with anxiety was to teach them to calibrate a personal scale. And with some of my patients, what I did was I said, okay, in the beginning of the techniques that I'm going to teach you and that you're going to practice in order to lower your anxiety, the first thing I want you to do in this first week that we're working together is between session number 1 and session number 2. All I want you to do is 3 times a day, I want you to write either in a notebook or make a note on your phone that you can record something into. I want you to write your number 3 different times a day. And it doesn't matter when you do it. Some people set an alarm and do it at 3 specific times of the day. Some people just remember, okay, at least 3 times a day, maybe 4 or 5, but at least 3 times just going to stop and ask myself, in this moment, what number would I assign myself? Am I a 3? Am I a 6? Where am I on the scale? Okay. And then you write it in your note on your phone or you write it in your notebook where you're going to record that each day for your first week. Okay. So I gave people that assignment and I said, go home and do that. And I did this even before I taught them any other techniques to lower their anxiety. Okay. This is why I'm sharing this with you because I got this interesting data from that set of patients that did a few days of this exercise even before they did anything else. This is the only thing that they did first. Okay. So what I found was that many of my patients came back in session number 2 and told me that their subjective general sense of their stress level was already starting to come down. Their anxiety was starting to come back into the moderate, relatively normal range simply because they were paying attention. Okay. And this is very interesting to me because I tend to think about the powerful techniques like concrete thinking and mindful breathing, which I've talked about in other videos on this channel, because those are the ones that reliably give very powerful, long lasting results. But interestingly, I noticed with my patients who, for the first few days, simply were stopping 3 or more times a day to check in with themselves and say, hey, what number would I assign on a scale of 1 to 10? Okay, I'm going to write it down and then go on with my day. I found that these patients, simply because they were adding in that extra feedback loop for what they were generally paying attention to, they were already starting to lower their own stress. And again, if you think back to my analogy for driving a stick shift car, what we're doing is basically taking a driver and we're taking their earplugs out and we're taking the paper off the tachometer. And then we're saying, okay, can you drive? And does their driving look better when they can see the tachometer and when they can hear the engine RPMs? Yes, it does, because their natural capacity to drive a stick shift works better when they have better inputs into the system so their brain can actually be more accurate in manipulating the controls. All right. And when we actually check in about 3+ times per day, we have added in some extra essential information to the brain that starts to let the person's natural ability to cope work better. And, one of the ways I think that works is that one of the things about stress is that we tend to ignore it. Obviously, you're not completely ignoring it if you already assess yourself as being anxious and needing to do something about it. But in a lot of moments, our brain is kind of rejecting and putting at arm's length certain aspects of our experience that are on the miserable end of the tone continuum. And one of the functions of that is to reduce the information coming into the brain. Now, you could argue, I don't want more of that information because it's miserable and I'm trying to not have it, right? I'm trying to be subjectively more neutral or positive and less miserable and more happy and less anxious. But the thing is, the brain might be reducing some of the essential information that actually could help you steer your ship more effectively so that your internal capacities, which you already have, can work more effectively. All right. So I invite you to try this because it's super easy. All right. And will it solve all of your anxiety problems? No. Will it potentially enhance your brain's ability to let your inner capacities work better for you? I think it's likely with a lot of viewers of this video. And it's easy to do, takes very little time and energy, and has no risks or side effects. So you can't hurt yourself with the technique, right? So for the next week, I invite you, just get a notebook or make a note on your phone. And 3 times a day, just stop for a second and say, what number on a scale of 1 to 10 would I give my current stress level? And just record it and then go on. Okay. And then after doing that for a few days, pay attention to, does that have an overall effect? Do you think that it's one potentially useful component for your overall stress regimen, right? Now, again, in terms of an overall stress regimen, I would not recommend for you or anybody really that this be the only technique that they do, because again, it has a fairly reliable but kind of mild to moderate effect, but sometimes a very essentially positive and beneficial effect. So this shouldn't be the only tool in your toolbox. Okay. And if you want to learn other tools, go browse the videos in my channel because I have other types of techniques which are a bit more robust and other things that I would recommend that you put in your toolbox in order to handle stress and lower anxiety. But this is definitely an interesting one because of what I've noticed from so many patients who have practiced it and then come back to me later and said, wow, I'm already feeling less stressed and I've only done this one little simple thing. It's weird, but it does work that way and for the reasons that I explained. So if you like this kind of content, hit the like button below. if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, be sure to do so you can be notified of upcoming videos that I publish regularly here. And one last thing that I want to share with you is if you look in the description below, I'll put a link to a free ebook that I give out, which is a short ebook with easy to learn, easy to practice exercises that very reliably will help you lower your stress and anxiety. Totally free. Just click the link in the description below and you can get a copy of that for yourself. All right. I'll see you in an upcoming video.